or if you would like to be baptized on May 5th. So, in just a little bit, in our new series called Together, 6 Conversations for a Lifetime of Connection, we're going to invite a little bit of talk back time. So Jamarcus will be on the floor with a microphone. If you have questions about this morning's teaching, and we'll do this for the next several weeks, we would love to hear the questions. If you have a story that fits in with where we are, we would love to hear your story and how this has worked out in your life. So Together really deals with this. In the Bible, when we start to look at how God describes relationships with people, when he talks about his people in particular, whether they're doing good things, bad things, or anything in between, he describes those relationships like a marriage relationship. Marriage becomes the thing that God uses to illustrate and highlight how our relationship with him works. We're going to talk very particular about marriage, but here's the catch. The things that we learn about marriage and relationship can be applied to most any other relationship that we're involved in, including and especially our relationship with God, if marriage is that kind of mirror witness to that. So this morning, we're going to enter into this conversation about grace. At Cornerstone, we believe that being connected to Christ and his community is how we experience this good life that he promises us, invites us to. We talk about living 6G, so you could imagine if it's 6 conversations for a lifetime of connection, we're going to talk about how to live a 6G marriage, a marriage that's connected to Jesus, connected to each other, and is being fruitful in all that Jesus has invited us to. And we begin with grace. We describe 6G grace like this: receiving and experiencing God's grace through Jesus. Now, what does that have to do with marriage? How do we engage being gracious to each other and receiving and experiencing God's grace in our marriage relationships? I'd like to invite you to Hebrews chapter 12. And so in Hebrews chapter 12, the writer of Hebrews is talking about this dynamic to endure in our faith, and then he gives a warning towards the close of the writing. Beginning in verse 14, the writer of Hebrews says to us, "Pursue peace with everyone and holiness. Without it, no one will see the Lord." Hold on to that for just a minute. If our marriages are intended to be witnesses of who God is, and by that I'm going to back up to something I said last week. If you weren't with us last week, or maybe you forgot, and go back and check that message out. The whole point of marriage initially was to display God's goodness, his benevolence, and his dominion over all the earth to each other and to all of creation. Marriage was the primary witness that God selected to let everybody and everything know who he is. We saw in Ephesians chapter 5 last week that there is a mutual submission to each other as we submit to Jesus, and then that role works out differently. The wives are to respect the husbands, to honor the husbands, and the husbands are to love the wives in the same way Christ loved the church, to present the wife as without blemish and spotless. It's insane, the responsibility that Scripture puts on the husband to uplift and affirm the wife. The challenge to love the wife like you love your own body, because no one hates their own selves, right? There's this tension of how do we do that? And so we pull that back and we go now into this context in Hebrews chapter 12, pursue peace with everyone and holiness. Without it, no one will see the Lord. You ever been in that place in your marriage relationship, or maybe in a relationship with someone else, and it's not peaceful? And maybe it's that place where either you're walking on eggshells all the time, or maybe you're just explosively angry all the time, and there's no graciousness, there's no peace in that relationship. It doesn't feel like God's in the middle of it, does it? And that's the kind of conversation we're looking at here, right? Pursue peace with everyone in holiness. Without it, no one will see the Lord. Make sure that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no root of bitterness springs up, causing trouble and defiling many. make sure that no one falls short of the grace of God. As a husband, my primary aim is to make sure that Corey experiences the grace of God. As a pastor, when people come in for counseling, that's what I'm inviting them to also. Make sure that no one falls short of the grace of God. And there are times we talk about grace and we think that grace simply is about forgiveness. That's part of it. Forgiving each other as God in Christ forgave you. But also helping people to experience favor. God's favor is an act of graciousness. So how do I live in a forgiving relationship with my wife? And how do I live in a relationship where she's going to experience God's favor in that as well? And so that's what we talk about when we talk about this dynamic of grace in marriage. Grace is the foundational connection upon which all other aspects of life flourish. We were made to live. Human beings were made to live, and not just to survive. If we went back to Genesis 1 and 2, we were made to flourish. Everything that we needed was provided for us by God. We were made to flourish. Sin breaks everything. And when we live in this relationship where sin has broken everything, and we don't feel that dynamic of flourishing. But we were made to flourish. When we talk about grace, when Jesus lived and died and rose again, through faith in him, God reestablishes with us the invitation to flourish under him. Outside of relationship with Jesus, we live a life separated from God, broken by sin, no connection to him, not withheld by him, willingly opposed by us. We often get those things confused. Like God isn't withholding grace from us. We will willingly reject his invitation for grace and forgiveness. And if God is withholding nothing from us, there's a lesson there for how we live into relationship with others, especially when it comes to grace and forgiveness, to not withhold from them. So grace is foundational. It is the foundational connection upon which everything else in life will flourish. Marriages flourish, then, on compassionate responsiveness. Compassionate responsiveness. We are always having to respond in marriage to each other. It's true in a lot of other relationships. I'll give you an example. One time when Corey and I first married, we were with our one of our older kids yesterday. It's a beautiful celebration. We've got our oldest child is married and expecting their first child, so they're celebrating a baby moon. I was too broke to have a baby moon. Like, what was this? How do you have a baby moon when you're about to have a kid? Well, they're doing that, and they're having a great time, and we talked to them yesterday where they are having their fun. We were with our second oldest yesterday. It was her birthday. She turned 22, and we have another who was over on Thursday night who just got married in November. She's 20, and they're all young and married. I was 22. Corey was 21 when we got married. And not long after we got married, we're kind of reflecting on like being young and dumb and married together, right? Like, because you got to learn how to be married, right? You got to learn how to be an adult, let alone be an adult with another person. Like, if you're married in the room, let me tell you, the hardest thing we had to learn from each other was laundry. Like, it was... When I was in college, this is how laundry worked for me. I could take a basket of clothes home, and my grandmother would wash them. They would magically be folded, and I would put them back in my car. Then, about 2 years into college, I met Corey, and her mom made this wonderful invitation. Save your coins. Anytime you need to do laundry, just bring your laundry over to our house. You can do it here. Interestingly enough, my laundry would end up completed and folded in the same basket. Corey's like, how in the world do you get my mom to do your laundry? I'm like, I don't know. Maybe she likes me better. You know? So then we get married, and we live life like this. Wear all of your clothes, and when you're out of clothes, do laundry. I mean, how in the world do two people have this many clothes? We figured it out eventually. But one time, early in our marriage, Corey, she's a hairstylist, if you don't know this by trade, and her hairstyling group, this group of women, wanted to start a softball team. Two of the women in her work environment were really good at softball, like crazy good at softball. And they came to me one day and they said, Jeremy, we would like for you to be our softball coach. And I said, I don't know anything about softball. Really, I never played baseball, don't know anything about softball, whatever. And they're like, no, you don't understand. You're big, you have a big voice, and we need women to listen to you. We'll take care of the softball techniques. You take care of keeping these women in line. I'm like, what in the world? Good luck, by the way. So Corey's like, I want to play, and she's never played softball before. And so we go out to a backstop. I'm going to teach you how to throw. You got to be able to throw. If you're going to play right field, left field, you got to be able to throw a ball, right? And so we go to learn how to play softball. And I said, this is how you throw a softball. And I'm like, if I'm going to pretend that I'm out in the outfield and I'm going to throw the ball into this cage, and I want you to do the same thing. So I throw the ball. And instead of throwing it into the cage, I was throwing it like I was deep right field. The ball sails over the cage. And it continues to fly. And then out of the corner of my eye, I see a car. They eventually connect. Boom. Thud. The ball goes flying off the side of the car. The car smashes the brakes. I look at Corey and she goes, run! So I did. I started running to their car and she's running to our car. Like, what are you doing? She's like, let's get out of here. Compassionate responsiveness. Corey, we can't get out of here. We just hit their car. We have to go make it right. So we get to the car. She's like, fine, you're right. We get to the car. The guy gets out, and he's just like, oh, man, it left a cave. Who would have thought, well, I mean, with this arm, but who would have thought that softball would have smashed that car so bad? And the guy goes, we just got it back from the body shop today. I was like, no. He's like, we bought the car, and pulling out of the lot, my wife had a wreck and smashed this door. And Corey's like, see, I told you we should have ran. So everything worked out fine. But marriages are built, they flourish with compassionate responsiveness. And that's where we start to experience grace together. But there's obstacles to grace. There's obstacles to a lot of things in our lives, but in particular with grace. And here's what happens. Like most often, we are more gracious to total strangers than to our spouses. Why? Because they don't know us? Or because we feel safe with our spouses that we can treat them however we want to? Compassionate responsiveness leads to grace. How do we do this in a way that affirms each other? When we were early in our marriage, we were so broke. Like we used to scrounge to go on a date to Taco Bell, no joke. And if we could find enough change in the couch, we could get 2 bean burritos. And if we found some extra change on the way, we could add sour cream to it. And that was a date for us. Well, then you insert Daniel into our second year of marriage. This is when we had our first child. We were trying to do things right, trying to live well, make all the payments, do everything the way we're supposed to, even though finances were at a minimum. And I wanted to go to this conference called Promise Keepers. It was a men's conference. I don't know if it's still going on or not, but it used to be going on back in the day. And I wanted to go to this conference. And our landlords at the time were Christians. And I told them, I can't afford to pay you all the rent because I want to go to this conference. Can we make an arrangement where I can pay you backwards? And they were like, totally cool. I didn't tell Corey because I made the arrangement. We were all set. Well, Daniel's born. They wanted to see Daniel, so we were going to take Daniel by. And I just thought, you know what? I'll just run in and pay the rent real quick. Don't worry about it. So, no. They want to see Daniel. Let's take him in. No. I just stay in the car. I'll be right back. I'm going to go just pay the rent. We'll get you right back. And we went through that kind of discussion for a minute. And she goes, okay, buddy, what's going on? I said, "Well, I didn't pay them all the rent last month because I want to go to Promise Keepers. And, no, everything's good." She's like, "What?" I'm like, "I shorted the rent so I could go to Promise Keepers. Now I got to go pay them up, but I didn't tell you because I was kind of embarrassed about it." And she's like, "Why didn't you just talk to me about it? We could have figured it out." She didn't yell at me. She didn't rip my head off. She didn't compassionate responsiveness. But so often we treat each other worse than strangers. And that's happened in our relationship too, unfortunately. So why do we do that? What are the obstacles? One is living a me marriage instead of a we marriage. You start right there, everything starts to fall apart. When marriage becomes about you first, you're in trouble. You want to know something though? Jesus talks about this. He says, "In my kingdom, the one who wants to be first must be last." Because Jesus came to serve, not be served. So we have to put ourselves in the same capacity. But when I put me first, I'm not living marriage. Marriage is a we event, right? The man and the woman, they cling to each other. They become one flesh. It's a we situation. But when I live a me marriage instead of a we marriage, that throws everything off. It's a complete obstacle to grace because guess what? When I'm living selfishly, I'm not being very gracious to anybody else. And that can be true in any relationship you have. How do I pay attention to other people? In marriage, how do you do that in a way that elevates the other person and that other person elevates you? When you're both pursuing a we marriage, it eliminates the obstacle. But that's an obstacle. Creeping phantoms. The worst person in your marriage is you. But not the you in front of you. The you that you think is you. The person who's so good that you can never match up to. Or the marriage that's so good you can never meet their standard. You ever been trapped by phantoms in your life? That version of you that you think everybody expects you to be, but no one's ever told you that? We have those relationships with God too, right? We think that there is a person that God wants to love, and for some reason it's not me, even though He said He wants to love me. But if I was a more perfect version of me, then God would love me. We go through that, don't we? I hear people all the time, "Pastor, I'll come to church when I get my life together." No, man, come to church so that we can together get our lives working, right? That's what we do. Creeping phantoms. I tell women when we get in these conversations as we're counseling through marriages, is like, you have another woman in the relationship already. And it's the phantom version of you. And there's another man trying to creep into your marriage. It's the phantom version of him. And if you don't get rid of the phantoms, you're going to have division in comparison to someone that doesn't even exist. And so you stop being gracious to yourself because you can never match that person. And that creeping phantom begins to dominate your relationship. And even if you're not in a relationship, you can still put that phantom in place. Because God made you as you are to grow into Him, not to be perfect already. He is perfecting you. He is shaping you and molding you and lifting you in the image He wants you to be. But when we let the phantom win, we've already lost. We've given ourselves over to something that doesn't even exist. Creeping phantoms are obstacles to grace. And if I can't receive grace myself, I'm not going to be able to extend grace very well to somebody else. Bitter roots. The writer of Hebrews would continue to let no bitter root. Did you hear that when we read it? Let no bitter root. Make sure that no one falls short of the grace of God and that no bitter root springs up. Corey and I have been married for 26 years this May. 26 years is the potential for a lot of bitter roots to grow up, to be deep into who we are. But it doesn't take 26 years to be bitter about something. You can have those roots of bitterness that grow into who you are based on all kinds of situations. And when those bitter roots grow up, you think the me versus we is in trouble there. Those bitter roots keep you from moving forward at all. Because now that root of bitterness becomes resentful against God and the other person. to where either God owes you something or that other person owes you something, and they've blown it so much. There's never been grace, or there isn't grace extended, and we don't know how to move beyond that. And those bitter roots start to just grow into who we are. Bitter roots are obstacles to grace. Pride. I was talking to a young husband the other day, and I said to him, he's like, I just don't know how to be a spiritual leader in my home. I said, fair. No one knows how to do that. We have to learn it. Right? It's hard enough to be a spiritual leader over yourself, and then God says to wash your wife with the word so that she can be presented without blame and spotless. And you're going, how do I do this? And then mutual submission to each other? Really? When you've been single for any amount of time, I think one of the things that work in Corey and I's favor is we got married so young we didn't know different. And then sometimes you get in a relationship older and you've lived a life for some time, and then you're trying to figure out how to mutually submit to each other. Woo. At least we were young and dumb. Like there's a difference, like being naive versus having a learned pattern. I'll take naive every day because I can learn something. But sometimes those patterns, they get so part of who we are, and then we don't want to change. And the other person can't change us. Only you and Jesus working together can change you through the Holy Spirit. So where do I do that? And it becomes an issue of pride. I told this young husband, I said, man, we got to learn this. And there's tension to it. I said, look, in my relationship with Corey, I said, sometimes this has cost me some things, and sometimes it has been a great move. I said, I have tried to figure out how, when we have conflict with each other, I've tried to figure out how I can start the apology, even when I'm right. Like, sometimes I'm in the right position and she's wrong. Sometimes. And sometimes I'm wrong. And when I'm wrong, I actually have a harder time apologizing than when she's wrong. Because pride starts to root there. But here's what I think. He's like, well, my wife did this. I didn't do anything. I said, that's true. No, it's not true. It takes two to be into situations, right? So I told him, I said, even if you're right and righteous in the conversation, here's how you do it well. You can go to your wife and you can lead the conversation by saying, I'm sorry we're not on the same page. I really want to live a life with you that's together, and I'm sorry we're not on the same page. How can we get on the same page? Did you just apologize for what she did? He's like, no. I said, can you lead into a genuine place of repentance and let's get this thing right without having to say you were wrong if you were right? And he's like, yeah. And sometimes I'm flat out wrong. Sometimes I have to go, you know what, Corey, I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Because if I had lived more righteously with you, we wouldn't be in this situation. I blew this one. But I've made it a point for the majority of our marriage to be the first person to apologize in the large majority of all of our conflicts. As a way of going, let's be on the same page. When pride gets in the way, you don't look to make things right. You dig your heels in. You look to win rather than to be righteous. And when you look to win, you're always going to lose. In marriage in particular. There are some things that you fight for and you dig in over. And there are times when we've had to fight and dig in over stuff because I wanted to anchor myself in and lift Corey up or lift my kids up or they have to dig in to lift me up. But that's different than letting pride get in the way and being destructive in our relationships. So those obstacles are huge. I love what 2 Corinthians tells us. Paul is writing this letter to the Corinthians, and he has this issue. He calls it a thorn in his flesh. And maybe he's got this thing, and we always speculate, was it his eyes, was it his hips, whatever. He calls it a thorn. Let's just stick there, right? And in the middle of that, as Paul is leading to God, do something. He says, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is perfected in your weakness. So with all those obstacles, God's grace is sufficient for you in your marriages because his power is perfected in the weak places of your relationship and of yourself. When I trust him with that, he lifts me up. The opportunities, we're going to spell it out with grace. Here we go. God says, by God's grace, Paul says, I am what I am. His grace toward me was not ineffective. God's grace is not ineffective towards you, nor in the relationships you're in. So what does grace in relationship look like? One, we're going to spell this acronym out, grace. Grace is this: give your spouse the benefit of the doubt. And this can work with others too. I got a guy I'm working with, and I told him, if you're being honest with me, then this is what I would conclude. That's up to the person. If the person's going to lie to you behind the scenes, there's other problems. But as far as it starts with me, I want to start by giving my spouse the benefit of the doubt. I want to start there. That's where I start giving grace. Give her the benefit of the doubt. Give him the benefit of the doubt. Risk being honest. You would think that it's not a risk with the person that's supposed to be there with you through thick and thin, right? Rich or poor, sickness, health, all that kind of stuff. Hardest person to be honest with is the person that you married, because you don't want to be rejected by that person. Like the worst pain of rejection comes from the one that you thought was supposed to unconditionally receive you, right? So when that person rejects you, it hurts more. So we have to risk being honest. Accept your spouse. Not change your spouse, accept your spouse. As God's gift to you, receive that spouse. Accept them. Are there things that Corey doesn't like about me? Yes, I snore, apparently. Like when you wake up in the morning, you say, hey, honey, how'd you sleep? Well, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being no snoring, you were a 4. That's pretty good. Oh. She hasn't kicked me out of the bedroom yet. I still get to go to bed with her. Accept your spouse. And there's all kinds of things that could go into. Personality differences, the way you come at things, family histories. Accept your spouse. Complain without criticizing. Can you not like a situation, complain about it, get on the same page without becoming critical to the other person? Yes. When I complain about a something, it's different than criticizing a someone. When I criticize someone, now we're fighting. So I've come against the person rather than going, can we solve this situation? Complain without criticizing. And then finally, embrace each other's differences. Embrace each other's differences. That's the goal, right? Is how do we live into a place where we can be one, because the man and the woman aren't the same. How do we come into this, cling into each other, become one flesh? You have to embrace each other's differences. Corey and I could not be further apart from each other when it comes to our personalities in particular. The way I do things versus the way she does things, by nature, is very different. And we had to figure out how do we bring these differences together so that we could be on the same page in our relationship. So we have just a little bit of time here. I wonder if you have any conversation that we may have, questions, comments, stories that you would like to share. And as you think about that, we transition here, I want to just encourage you here. Be kind to one another, Ephesians reminds us. Tender-hearted, forgiving one another.